So what is the problem exactly, right? I'd like to start off with just kind of outlining what we're kind of discussing and how we're going to try to solve it, right? So with modern day technology stacks, right, technology is rapidly changing. And that's great for a lot of different things, right? Usually leads to increased productivity, lower overhead. However, with any big change, there's always going to be a couple of hurdles, right? And one of those big hurdles is how to deal with legacy applications. So how do we solve for this challenge exactly, right? Well, first and foremost, the easiest way to kind of solve for this challenge is to just simply migrate to a modern system, right? So moving that legacy data into a modern system and really kind of upgrading your technology stack to support the new features and functionality of that modern system. That's going to be your best bet. And I say, if you can go for it, do it. It could be a longer and difficult path, but overall will lead to better outcomes in the long run. But sometimes, oftentimes, unfortunately, it's not economically feasible to get rid of these old systems, right? You might have processes or skill sets and people around this legacy application that are just too expensive to replace. Additionally, you might have budgetary constraints. Maybe you already have other large initiatives that are in place. So a shift like this could be, somewhere down the future, but not quite ready for you guys to move away from it today. So how do we deal with that whenever we can't necessarily move away from it? Oh, actually, before I move on to the next slide, I did want to also mention that there are links to a couple of other webinars down there at the bottom, how to avoid risk when moving legacy apps to the cloud, and how to effectively migrate data from legacy systems. If you can migrate, I highly recommend checking out some of those webinars as well. And once you guys get these slides, those links will be in there as well. So what do you do if you can't migrate away, right? Maybe you still have some critical data that you need to integrate with your other systems, such as, for analytical purposes, business intelligence, that, really is kind of key to your business. So to solve for this, we're going to talk about a couple of different ways you can actually, improve upon your legacy system and integrate it into your other pipelines. The first is going to be with data virtualization. And then we'll move on to more of the traditional sort of ETL type processes, direct connections, file transfers, those types of things. So first up is data virtualization. So what is data virtualization, right? It essentially allows you to kind of manipulate data without actually knowing the underlying technical details of its location and format. It gives you sort of a unified and updated data model for you to leverage for analytics and business intelligence purposes, right? So it gives you a nice holistic view of the data from all your various applications, including legacy ones, right? So it does come with certain drawbacks though, right? It does necessitate additional data storage requirements. So you're going to have this virtualization, a lot of times, taking up additional disk space, things like that. And it also can lead to delays, right? Because you're pulling data out from all these different applications, creating that virtualization layer, and then also pulling that data from the virtualization layer to your end users or analytical processes, business intelligent processes, what have you. So it does kind of create an additional layer there, which kind of can slow things down a little bit, right? So how do we actually get to this data virtualization layer, or how do we actually get data out of these legacy systems though, is what we'll talk about next, right? So one of the first things that we'll talk about is direct connections to that data. So how do we connect, right? We usually connect, using data integration software to sort of bridge the gap, right? You're able to connect to a wide range of different resources, and you can sort of implement business logic as needed, add additional processes, validations, checks, making sure that your data is as clean and as cleansed as possible before integrating it into other parts of your ETL pipelines. So how do we, what's the most common method, I guess, behind extracting the data out? Well, that would probably be connecting to backend databases, right? It's probably going to be the most likely way that you'll connect to that legacy system. because many legacy applications are sort of powered by databases, right? Everything that you see is usually stored in a database on the back end, but also not just the data itself, but there's also parts of business logic that are incorporated often into that data model. So it's kind of important to kind of keep both of those things in mind, not just the data that's stored there, but also any business logic that is stored there, any rules, things like that that might be stored in the background. Now, reading and extracting data is fairly low risk, but you'll still want to watch out for, performance, query performance in particular, right? So only pull in the data that you need and not anything else that you might not actually need for your ETL pipelines, right? At the end of the day, you're connecting to a legacy applications database. Most likely this legacy application is being used. So you want to make sure that you provide as little performance hit as possible whenever you do extract data out of there. Now, on the other hand, writing data back into the database is going to be a little more tricky. There's going to be risks to it, right? You need to make sure that you understand your entire, sort of business models or the data model for the backend database, because oftentimes adding data into it will often hit more than one table. It'll have dependencies between them, things like that. So sometimes writing data without really understanding the full consequences of it can lead to, broken screens, broken, front end system. So it's very important that you understand that data model for that database. Another sort of common method that you might need, connect to a legacy system through is via file extracts, right? So file extracts will allow you to sort of import and export data out of it. A lot of legacy applications do support this. Sometimes, though, it is limited in what you can do and might even require manual intervention. So maybe it's not something that you can automatically, trigger off. But hopefully you can. If not, maybe there's some sort of script or code that you can leverage to, avoid that manual intervention. And then beyond that, you might also be limited in what you can sort of pull out of there, right? It might not have a full and complete understanding of all the data that you might need. In which case you might need to do a hybrid combination of the two, right? Maybe get the data extract and then have a lookup table that you create that only gets updated every so often, that you would sort of pull against to get the final sort of output that you're looking for. So you might need to do a hybrid type of model with that. So that can be a little bit challenging. And so, that's always something to kind of keep in mind. And then beyond that, right, the data formats can also be challenging, right? Oftentimes they're written for human consumption as opposed to, sort of processing by machine. So you might need to, have some advanced logic in there to extract the data, kind of harmonize the data, and make sure that you really understand the data before inserting into your various ETL pipelines. And that can be kind of challenging with something that's made for human consumption as opposed to for machines. So once you have this data, right, what do you do with it, right? So now that you've extracted the data out of the legacy system using some sort of ETL process, data virtualization, things like that, right? What can you do with this data? Well, there's a variety of things that you can do, and hopefully you're doing more than one thing, right? Leveraging this data. Getting it out of the system is fairly hard, so you want to make sure you maximize the usage and productivity of the data that you do manage to extract from your legacy system, right? So a couple of different things that you can do, right, is you could absolutely turn it into some sort of human readable report that allows end users to get valuable and ideally actionable information from your legacy system. But beyond that, you can also add additional layer of an API, right? So you can take this legacy system, wrap it with like an API layer, and use that API endpoint then to be called or invoked by other applications. Internally at CloverDX, we refer to this as data services. But it's a nice way to sort of make your legacy system appear as though it is API compatible. So getting that data out of there and then wrapping it in an API layer, and unbeknownst to your end users or other applications, as far as they're concerned, it is a modern application with, API calls that you can make to it, and that sort of thing, right? So that's always going to be valuable as well. And additionally, you might need to just integrate it into some other database, data warehousing purposes, something like that, some sort of flat file for, some other application. So you can do that all as well on top of all of these things. That brings us to sort of CloverDX data management platform. And CloverDX data management platform is excellent in kind of handling all of this because it has a wide range of connectivities. So you can sort of extract data from files, not just simple files, but also more complicated files such as EDI or named record type files, that sort of thing. But then it also supports a whole host of databases. So anything that is basically JDBC compatible, it can sort of connect to. And then it also, does more modern things like, processing of JSON payloads and XML files, things like that, via API calls. Additionally, it is cloud compatible, so you can sort of connect to various cloud technologies to extract data or to upload data to the cloud. And another thing that is always kind of important to keep in mind with legacy systems is that you might introduce some pretty complex scenarios, right? So you might have a one-to-many in case you need to extract that data from your legacy application and do multiple things with it, or maybe even a many-to-many scenario. Regardless of what that complex scenario looks like to integrate that legacy application, CloverDX can do a pretty good job of handling those scenarios. And then additionally, with legacy systems often comes legacy data or, sort of messy data, right? And so it's going to be important to kind of keep those validation steps and ensure that the data is as you'd expect it to be. And so CloverDX can handle that very well. And then finally, one of the best things about CloverDX is that you can actually fully automate all of these processes, right? So you don't have to sit there and watch the messy data flow across, but you can actually, have checks and validation and stuff, for example, that would stop any sort of bad data from integrating into your other parts of your data pipeline. So it's very powerful in allowing you to kind of automate and orchestrate multiple processes, wait for one thing to complete before, triggering off the next thing, and then kind of also automate the full reporting structure, right? So if there is some sort of error or exception, it can automate the, notification of that via text message or email, things like that. And just at a high level, right, we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but it does support database connectivity, which you might need for those legacy applications, and it does support files. And it doesn't really matter where those files are located, right? They could be local, they could be on a Amazon S3 bucket or some sort of other cloud providers bucket. It could be via HTTPS, like call, or FTP, Hadoop infrastructure, for example, too. And then on the other end, you also have more modern technologies that it supports, both REST, SOAP, and other APIs. And it's easy to kind of add support for any API with the application, right? Both when it comes to connecting and modernizing your existing ETL pipelines so that essentially it looks like a modern ETL pipe or modern application with an API layer. And the high level, at a high level, there's two pieces of our platform. One is Designer. That's where you sort of design and code these data pipelines and ensure that everything is tested and looks proper. And then once you're happy with that, that's where you can sort of deploy it to server, as you can see sort of on the more right-hand side of the diagram there. And server is where you sort of automate everything, orchestrate everything. And then you can also scale up with multiple nodes and clusters and cores, all that kind of good stuff. And you'd also get notifications in case there are any issues with any of your ETL pipelines. So that's essentially, so how can CloverDX help? Well, it can connect to a wide range of sources, right? So all of those legacy applications that you might have, sort of antiquated technologies, databases, files of some sort, and it can support those. And not only that, but it can support sort of advanced, business logic and transformation that you might require. And it can automate sort of that data extraction, right? So if there are, updates to a database, it can kind of monitor that database and read that database and only pull in sort of records that have changed. If we're talking more about flat files, maybe there is some sort of code that you can invoke to extract the data out of there. And Clover can sort of handle that process as well for you to invoke that code or, command line, things like that to get the data out of your legacy system. And then obviously automate the whole entire end-to-end process and give you alerts if there are any issues. And so really give you that confidence that, things are flowing as you'd expect. Now, important thing to kind of keep in mind is that each system and each situation is very unique and needs to be addressed as such, right? So a great place to start is to, analyze how data gets out of your system currently, take a look at the processes that you use currently to get the data out. Maybe you have a process that takes a lot of time, a lot of man hours for you, which might, involve a lot of data entry, things like that. And then take a look at what it would take to modernize that integration into your data pipelines, right? So it's kind of that, analyze what's your biggest pain point and figure out what it would take to solve that pain point, and then kind of strategically pick and choose where you start the attack from, right? Where you start the improvements from. So that's important to kind of keep in mind. And testing is also going to be another important thing to keep in mind. But once you do have this data extracted and you do, sort of have the ETL pipelines, hopefully that'll lead to much better outcomes, much more better business intelligence, all of that kind of good stuff.